Nadia stepped onto the creaking wooden porch, the chill of late November brushing her cheeks. She had arrived home for the Thanksgiving holiday after a grueling quarter at the company where she worked as a junior financial analyst. She was eager for warmth and comforting smells of roasted turkey, yet a strange tension seemed to linger in the air the moment she turned the doorknob. Inside, the living room looked almost frozen in time. Family portraits still displayed her younger self smiling timidly alongside her older brother Greg and their proud parents. A flickering lamp illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Nadia exhaled slowly, recalling how she used to tiptoe around her family's criticisms, forever striving to prove her worth. Despite her apprehension, she reminded herself she was no longer the insecure teenager who left for college. She had grown into a confident professional who'd recently received her first substantial performance bonus. She felt a surge of pride thinking about that moment, her manager praising her meticulous work, the envelope with a neatly printed check that symbolized her perseverance. Yet, as she set down her suitcase, Nadia sensed she might not get the unreserved congratulations she hoped for. The quiet was heavy, as though the walls themselves harbored secrets. With Thanksgiving only a day away, she braced for anything. Nadia tiptoed into the kitchen where her parents, Margaret and Howard, were sitting quietly at the table. They barely looked up when she greeted them. Margaret offered a quick nod, and Howard mumbled, "You're here." It wasn't precisely the warm welcome one might expect, but Nadia tried to brush it off. Greg, on the other hand, appeared in the doorway with an overly bright grin plastered on his face. He was dressed in a crisp button-down, the kind that suggested he'd just come from a business meeting. Nadia's stomach twisted with the usual mix of unease and resentment. Growing up, Greg had always been the favored child, charismatic and showered with parental attention. "Long trip?" he asked, voice smooth as silk. Nadia forced a smile. It was okay, no delays. She saw her parents exchange a look she couldn't decipher. Something about their guarded expressions made her skin prickle. She began to unpack groceries she'd picked up for Thanksgiving, hoping they might appreciate her gesture. But neither parent commented. Instead, Greg hovered, an oddly calculating glint in his eyes. Nadia could sense this Thanksgiving would be different. The warmth she sought felt unreachable, and a familiar dread settled in her heart. Upstairs in her childhood bedroom, Nadia carefully placed the envelope containing her performance bonus beneath a stack of folded sweaters in her suitcase. That bonus represented months of overtime, canceled weekends, and the constant pressure to outperform her colleagues. Securing it felt like tucking away a piece of her dignity, something she had earned on her own. She recalled the day she received it. The rush of excitement, the affirmation that her diligence had been recognized. It was more than just money. It was proof of her abilities. She fantasized about using it as a down payment on a better apartment, or perhaps taking a well-deserved vacation. Though she had initially considered sharing the good news with her family, a nagging voice cautioned her. Growing up, any success Nadia achieved often led to comparisons that favored Greg, or it was diminished entirely. She didn't want her accomplishment to spark another round of subtle insults, or worse, overshadowed by whatever Greg had going on. Still, Nadia felt a shred of hope. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time of gratitude, a chance for families to come together. Maybe this year, her parents would acknowledge her hard work. Maybe they would offer congratulations, if only for a moment. The next morning, aromas of sage and rosemary drifted through the house. Margaret was busy at the stove, stirring pots while scanning a handwritten recipe. Nadia offered to help, but her mother gave a vague nod without making room for her. Instead, Margaret seemed determined to direct everything herself. When Nadia tried to prepare a side dish, Greg strolled into the kitchen and insisted on showing off his cooking prowess. "Mom's taught me all the family recipes," he remarked, his voice thick with self-assurance. Nadia felt her shoulders tense. Even in menial tasks, Greg found ways to highlight his superiority. Howard sipped coffee and read the newspaper, occasionally barking out instructions to both siblings about household chores. But any praise or acknowledgement seemed reserved for Greg. Nadia noticed how her father beamed with pride when Greg confidently kneaded dough for the dinner rolls, receiving an approving pat on the back. Nadia quietly chopped vegetables at the far end of the counter, invisible again. While the rest of the family fell into their familiar roles, she realized her presence was more tolerated than genuinely welcomed. Despite her efforts, she felt an undercurrent of tension swirling, a portent of the conflict yet to unfold. The day wore on, and extended family began trickling in for the holiday meal. Cousins, uncles, and aunts bustled around, exchanging hugs and exclaiming over how much everyone had changed. Nadia tried to join the conversation, but her words often got drowned out by the boisterous greetings offered to Greg. When she slipped away to retrieve an extra chair from the garage, she overheard her mother whispering to an aunt. "Greg has such a bright future," Margaret bragged, voice brimming with pride. "He's sure to be CEO one day. Nadia's fine, but Greg, he's our golden child." Stunned, Nadia paused, gripping the chair's handle until her knuckles turned white. She swallowed the lump in her throat, refusing to let tears cloud her vision. It wasn't the first time she'd heard her mother gush about Greg, yet this time, the casual disregard for Nadia stung deeper. Returning to the crowded living room, Nadia planted a forced smile on her face. She resolved not to let it ruin her day. Thanksgiving was about gratitude, and she silently reminded herself of her accomplishments, hoping that soon her mother's dismissiveness wouldn't matter so much. For now, though, every laugh felt hollow, a preamble to a larger betrayal. With extended family settling in, conversations formed in clusters, each group catching up on the past year's highlights. Nadia found a small corner by the fireplace, trying to blend in. She couldn't help but notice how Greg enthralled everyone, telling stories of recent real estate ventures, exaggerating each success. The crowd lapped it up, showering him with compliments. After a while, Howard stood, clearing his throat. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, raising a glass of spiced cider. Everyone hushed. "To Greg, for his ongoing success and bright future. We're proud of you, son." The collective clinking of glasses followed. Nadia winced. She waited for her father to say something, anything, about her career milestones. But Howard merely took a swig of cider and sat down. She swallowed her frustration, trying not to let the slight show on her face. Aunt Linda, sensing the tension, ventured to ask, "And Nadia, you're doing well too, I hear?" Nadia smiled politely, but before she could speak, Margaret chimed in, "She's fine, just busy." The words were tossed aside as quickly as they came. Nadia's hopes for validation withered. Something inside her stirred, a slow-burning anger that hinted at betrayal yet to be fully realized. Dinner was finally served, and family members crowded around the long dining table, plates heaped with turkey, stuffing, and mashed potatoes. Between bites, Greg launched into a story about a lucrative deal he was eyeing. "It's practically guaranteed income," he boomed, making sure every relative hung on his every word. "But I need some capital up front to invest. Mom, Dad, we'll discuss after dinner, right?" Nadia noticed the way their parents beamed, nodding as though they were co-conspirators in Greg's grand vision. She felt heat prickle her cheeks. Had they always been this open about financially supporting him? She recalled her struggles in college, forced to juggle part-time jobs because her parents insisted she learn responsibility. Yet Greg, it seemed, was handed everything. She tried to enjoy her meal, but her appetite had vanished. Each enthusiastic response to Greg's stories chipped away at her composure. She clutched her fork, unable to drown out the incessant praise. All her achievements and the hard-earned bonus in her suitcase upstairs felt overshadowed by Greg's pipe dreams. Her gut told her something bigger was unfolding, a collision of past resentments and present circumstances that threatened to unravel what little peace remained. When the plates were cleared and the cranberry sauce had vanished, the family transitioned to the living room for dessert. Nadia poured herself a cup of black coffee, hoping the warm bitterness would ground her. She was exhausted, her emotions already frayed. Greg and Howard stepped aside, talking in hushed voices near the coat rack. Margaret joined them, her face set in a determined frown. Nadia stood close enough to catch only snippets of their conversation. Investment, financial struggle, Nadia's success. A chill rippled through her. Why were they discussing her success in that context? She was used to being relegated to the background, but never as a means for Greg's ambitions. She set her coffee cup on a side table and moved closer, feigning interest in her phone so as not to arouse suspicion. Suddenly, Greg's eyes flicked toward her. He smirked, the kind of smug grin that indicated he had a plan. Nadia's stomach tightened. Instinctively, she realized they were plotting something, and she was at the center of it. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling more alone than ever in that crowded house. If they wanted to co-opt her success for Greg's benefit, she feared the cost might be her long-awaited financial independence. The clock struck 8 when Howard cleared his throat and called everyone to gather in the living room again. Margaret stood beside him, hands clasped together. Greg hovered at their shoulder, eyes gleaming. Nadia felt a spike of anxiety as the room fell silent. "We have wonderful news," Howard began, forcing a tight smile. "Greg's planning an exciting new venture that requires immediate funding. After discussing as a family, we believe in supporting him wholeheartedly. He'll be unstoppable with the right resources." Nadia glanced around, confused by the phrase, "after discussing as a family." She certainly hadn't been consulted. Margaret picked up the thread. "We've already contributed a significant portion of our savings, but the remaining amount needed is substantial. Fortunately, we have a solution," she continued, looking directly at Nadia. "We'll rely on Nadia's bonus to close the gap." A hush enveloped the room. Nadia's jaw dropped. Her heart pounded in her ears. She half expected someone to object, but the extended family simply stared, as though waiting to see her reaction. She swallowed hard. How had her parents even learned about her bonus? And why were they so certain she would just hand it over? In that moment, she felt the betrayal spike like a physical blow. Nadia's breath caught in her throat. Disbelief washed over her like a freezing wave, leaving her momentarily speechless. Greg, emboldened by the silence, spoke up. "I know you'll understand, sis. We're family, and this kind of opportunity can't slip by. Dad and Mom said you got a decent bonus, right?" The extended family exchanged awkward looks, some pitying, some expectant. Nadia scanned their faces, desperate for an ally, but found none brave enough to speak. She opened her mouth, her voice quivering. "That money is mine. I worked for it. I have plans." Her father waved a dismissive hand. "Plans can wait. This is Greg's future we're talking about." Margaret nodded in agreement, stepping forward to smooth things over. "It's Thanksgiving, dear. Sacrifice is part of showing gratitude. Remember when you borrowed money from us for school?" Nadia's vision blurred with tears. She had indeed borrowed tuition money, which she'd paid back, every cent. Yet, they refused to recall that detail. She felt trapped, cornered in her own home, in front of a silent, watchful audience. The swirl of emotions, betrayal, hurt, and anger, threatened to swallow her whole. This was supposed to be a holiday for thanks, but it had devolved into a living nightmare. Overwhelmed, Nadia fled to the hallway, tears threatening to spill. She pressed her palms against the cool wall, trying to steady herself. Behind her, she heard footsteps, soft, uncertain. She turned to see Aunt Linda, her expression tinged with regret. "Nadia, dear, let's talk," Aunt Linda murmured, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your parents love you, but they think they know best. Family can be complicated." Complicated didn't even begin to describe it. Nadia felt a hollow ache in her chest. "I've worked so hard for that bonus. It's not fair." Aunt Linda sighed. "I understand, but your father and mother believe Greg's success benefits the whole family. They might be misguided, but they think they're doing what's right. But what about my dreams? My life?" Nadia's voice trembled. "Why must I sacrifice everything for Greg?" Her aunt pursed her lips, unable to offer a satisfying answer. Nadia walked away, numbness settling in. She realized no one else was going to defend her. She was alone in this. If she had any chance of keeping her earnings, she'd have to stand up for herself, no matter how much it cost her emotionally. With resolve, she headed back to face her parents, determined not to give in silently. Before confronting her parents, Nadia paused at the foot of the staircase, consumed by memories of childhood incidents. She recalled the day she'd won her middle school science fair. She'd proudly brought home the trophy, only to have her parents shrug and say, "Greg won his soccer match too," directing all their excitement toward his medal. Even then, she'd swallowed her disappointment and congratulated her brother. Another flash: high school graduation. She graduated with honors, but Greg's athletic scholarship overshadowed her accolades. That night, her parents threw a party celebrating his bright sports future, while Nadia's achievements received a lukewarm mention. Now the cycle repeated on a larger, more damaging scale. This wasn't a mere overshadowing. This was a direct theft of her hard-earned money. The wave of humiliation choked her as she clutched the banister. She realized her parents had never truly celebrated her accomplishments without turning them into a comparison, one she usually lost. Yet here she stood, older, tired, but determined. If she let them steamroll her again, she'd never break free. These memories hardened her resolve like tempered steel. Nadia's footsteps echoed on the stairs as she headed back into the living room, ready to speak her truth. Nadia re-entered the living room, where the tension was palpable. Most relatives lingered awkwardly, caught between familial loyalty and discomfort at witnessing the drama. Greg, Margaret, and Howard stood center stage, eyes trained on Nadia. She stepped forward, drawing in a shaky breath. "I won't hand over my bonus," she stated, trying to keep her voice firm. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that she wondered if everyone else could hear it too. Her mother's eyes flashed with disapproval. "Nadia, don't be selfish," Margaret countered. "We've sacrificed enough for you. It's time you repaid some of that kindness." Nadia's fists tightened at her sides. "Kindness isn't supposed to be a loan shark arrangement. I've always been grateful for everything you've done, but let's not pretend you don't heavily favor Greg at my expense." Greg, who had been silent for a moment, scoffed. "That's ridiculous. I've worked hard too, you know? This is just one opportunity. Why are you making it a big deal?" Emboldened by her anger, Nadia shot back. "This one opportunity is my money, Greg. I earned it by sacrificing nights and weekends. Do you have any idea what that means?" A stunned hush followed, the air crackling with unresolved tension. The confrontation was only beginning. The silence was broken by Uncle Martin's cough. He shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private," he suggested, glancing at the extended family, who stood like an audience at a tense theatrical performance. Margaret turned a sharp glare on him. "No need, Martin. This is a family matter, and we are family," she said pointedly, as though daring him to disagree. Nadia sensed the eyes of her cousins, aunts, and uncles burning into her. She hated how exposed she felt, but also recognized a sliver of an advantage. If this conversation remained public, her parents couldn't gaslight her into submission behind closed doors. Everyone would see their manipulations. She took a shaky breath and lifted her chin. "I appreciate everything you did for my education, but I paid back every penny I borrowed. This bonus is meant for my future. I can't let you or Greg take it away." Her father's voice boomed. "Watch your tone. Have you forgotten everything we've done for you? This is Thanksgiving, not a time for defiance. You owe us respect." A swirl of shame and anger collided within Nadia. She felt publicly disgraced and unsupported, yet she refused to buckle under their collective glare. Following the explosive scene, the assembled relatives began to disperse, muttering excuses to escape the thick tension. Some drifted into the kitchen, others outside to the porch. Only a few lingered, perhaps morbidly curious to see how this standoff would end. Greg rested a hand on Nadia's shoulder, feigning empathy. "Look, sis, I know how this must feel, but think of it this way. We'll be a team. My success can uplift us all." Nadia brushed off his hand. "Don't patronize me. You wouldn't be asking for my help if you respected me. You'd have worked to earn your own capital." Margaret interjected, her voice tight with frustration. "That's enough. We've made our decision. This is how we'll move forward as a family. Stop fighting us." But Nadia had reached her limit. Throughout the years, she'd always been the obedient daughter, hoping one day her achievements would be recognized. Now, her parents and brother wanted her to surrender the very symbol of her hard work. She could barely stomach the injustice. Her gaze swept over them. Parents who never genuinely applauded her, a brother who saw her only as a resource. A new resolve brewed within Nadia. She would not break. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. That evening, the house was cloaked in an uneasy silence. Nadia retreated to her old room, her thoughts swarming like angry bees. Sleep seemed impossible. She found herself pacing beneath the dim glow of a desk lamp, replaying her parents' demands and Greg's smug expression. Suddenly, a soft knock sounded. "Come in," Nadia whispered. Aunt Linda appeared, gently closing the door behind her. "I thought you might like some tea," she offered, holding out a steaming mug. Nadia's shoulders relaxed slightly. She accepted the cup and took a careful sip. Linda took a seat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry about what happened. The family can be blind in their favoritism." Nadia felt tears brimming again. "I've never asked them for special treatment," she said, voice trembling. "Just some basic respect. Now they're forcing me into something I never agreed to." Aunt Linda nodded sympathetically. "Your parents have always seen Greg as the golden child. They believe you're strong enough to handle yourself, but that doesn't excuse this betrayal." She paused, reaching into her pocket for a small keychain. "If you need a break, my home is always open. You don't have to endure this alone." For the first time all day, Nadia felt a spark of hope. There was at least one ally in this hostile environment. The promise of refuge steadied her frayed nerves. In the early hours of the morning, Nadia sat cross-legged on her bed, journaling every thought and plan that rattled in her head. If her parents demanded she hand over her bonus on Thanksgiving, what would stop them from doing it again and again in the future? She needed a strategy to protect herself. First, she considered going to the bank and withdrawing the funds in cash, but Greg had already overheard mention of the bonus. Her parents likely knew how much it was. Moving money around wouldn't eliminate the pressure. They might still try to manipulate her or threaten to tarnish her reputation within the family. Next, she thought about confronting Greg one-on-one. Could she negotiate some compromise? But as her pen hovered over the page, she recognized the futility. Her brother knew how to charm and coerce their parents into supporting him, and he wouldn't let go of free money easily. A glimmer of an idea took shape. If she exposed Greg's financial irresponsibility or his overblown claims, perhaps he would lose credibility. But she needed evidence to ensure that any confrontation ended in her favor. Closing her journal, she vowed to gather information, no matter how uncomfortable. It was time to fight back, quietly, methodically. Morning arrived, and the house awoke to an atmosphere of strained civility. Plates clinked in the kitchen as Margaret prepared a light breakfast, while Howard looked over some documents related to Greg's planned investment. Nadia lingered in the hallway, listening from a distance. Greg discussed numbers in a low voice. He frequently used terms like guaranteed returns, no risk, and fast profit, which piqued Nadia's suspicion. Real investments never promised a zero-risk scenario, especially not in Greg's track record. When she stepped into the kitchen, conversations abruptly halted. She stood there, arms folded, waiting for someone to address her. Howard cleared his throat. "We'll be expecting your portion of the funds by the end of the week." Nadia stiffened. "It's not happening. I've already told you that." Margaret set down her spatula with a clang. "Stop being ungrateful. This is your brother's future." "Then let him earn it," Nadia snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her tone. She glanced at Greg, who wore a mixture of anger and confusion. Turning on her heel, Nadia left the room, ignoring her mother's scolding voice trailing after her. The tension was reaching its breaking point, a taut wire that threatened to snap. She needed to finalize her plan, and soon. Later that day, Nadia managed to slip into the study, an old room filled with dusty encyclopedias and stacks of paperwork her parents never bothered to organize. She rifled through file folders, scanning documents that might reveal the truth about Greg's financial track record. If he'd ever failed to pay back loans or made poor investment choices, it might serve as leverage. Eventually, she found a worn file labeled Greg Finances. Inside were invoices, old loan agreements, and bank statements. Her heart pounded as she realized the extent of his debts. He'd taken out multiple loans over the years, each time roping their parents into co-signing. This new opportunity was just another scheme to bail him out, disguised as a guaranteed investment. She snapped pictures of the incriminating documents with her phone, carefully returning them to their folder. Just as she was about to leave, she heard footsteps near the door. Panicking, she stuffed the phone into her pocket and smoothed her hair. Margaret entered, eyeing Nadia suspiciously. "Need something?" "Just looking for a photo album," Nadia fibbed, forcing a smile. Her mother's gaze lingered, but she eventually nodded and left. Relief flooded Nadia as she slipped out of the study. She now possessed the ammunition she needed. By evening, Nadia's nerves were frayed, but she clung to her newfound evidence like a lifeline. She planned to confront Greg privately before things escalated further. However, fate had other ideas. Her parents summoned her to the living room again. The tension was reminiscent of the Thanksgiving night announcement. Unpleasant déjà vu. This time, Howard held a thick stack of papers in one hand. Greg stood beside him, a triumphant smirk in place. "Sign these," Howard commanded, extending the papers. "It's the official agreement that you'll transfer your bonus to Greg's account as soon as possible. We've even included a clause that states he'll pay you back once the investment yields returns." Nadia's stomach twisted. "I'm not signing anything." Greg shrugged, looking almost bored. "This is non-negotiable, sis. Mom and Dad are on board, and the rest of the family expects us to settle this amicably." Margaret stepped forward, eyes cold. "If you refuse, consider yourself cut off. No emotional or financial support from us ever again. You'll be disowned." Nadia's breath caught. It was a final, brutal betrayal. Her parents choosing Greg's pipe dream over her autonomy. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The entire family was prepared to watch her burn for Greg's sake. Nadia's anger flared into something feral. She pulled out her phone and held it up. "Before you threaten me, you should know I have proof of Greg's misuse of funds in the past. I found the documents in your study." Greg's cocky grin faltered. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Howard's face darkened. They all stared as Nadia continued, her words trembling with rage. "I have screenshots of multiple unpaid loans, investment flops, things you've all hidden to maintain Greg's golden image. If you try to force me into anything, I'll show the rest of the family. The entire community will know." A heavy silence followed her declaration. Greg's voice cracked when he finally spoke. That's private information. You have no right." Nadia cut him off, adrenaline surging. "No right? You invaded my privacy by demanding my paycheck. This ends now. I'm done being your backup plan." Howard slammed the stack of papers onto the coffee table, eyes blazing. "So, this is how you repay us? Blackmail?" Nadia shook her head, tears brimming but not falling. "I'm just protecting myself, something you've never done." For the first time, power shifted in the room. Nadia stood her ground, refusing to hand over what she'd rightfully earned. A wave of disorientation swept through the household. On one side, Margaret, Howard, and Greg stared Nadia down with a mix of anger and disbelief. On the other, Aunt Linda and a few cousins cautiously stepped forward, appearing horrified by the unfolding tension. Aunt Linda placed a gentle hand on Nadia's arm. "Let's all calm down. Threats aren't helping anyone." She shot a stern look at Nadia's parents. "There must be a better way to resolve this." Howard looked ready to protest when Uncle Martin chimed in. "I think Nadia has a point. She's worked hard. Forcing her to bankroll Greg without her consent is wrong." Margaret's face contorted with outrage. "What do you know about raising children? This is our family, our rules. Nadia owes us loyalty." A few more relatives murmured in agreement with Uncle Martin, clearly disturbed by the parents' tactics. Greg shifted uncomfortably, realizing the tide of public opinion wasn't fully on his side anymore. Nadia let out a trembling breath, grateful for the sudden support. While she had no desire to see her family torn apart, she couldn't allow their emotional blackmail to continue. For too long, she had been the scapegoat in a game rigged in Greg's favor. Now, others were seeing the injustice for what it was. Greg's phone buzzed loudly, interrupting the standoff. He snatched it up, scanning the screen, and his face drained of color. Nadia suspected his finances were unraveling faster than he'd led everyone to believe. "What is it?" Howard demanded, eyeing his son's reaction. Greg swallowed hard. "A missed payment on the commercial property loan. The bank is threatening foreclosure if I can't come up with the funds." Aunt Linda's eyes widened. "You're already in default?" Greg stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's not a big deal. Just a temporary setback. That's why I needed Nadia's bonus. I planned to cover this gap and then flip the property." "You lied to us," Howard boomed, voice trembling with fury. "You said your ventures were thriving." Greg looked pleadingly at Margaret, who stood aghast. "Mom, Dad, I can fix this if Nadia just—" "Enough!" Nadia cut him off, her voice slicing through the tension. "You were going to keep leeching off me until I had nothing left. No more." Silent shock passed through the room. Greg, once the golden child, suddenly wore the mantle of a desperate, failing schemer. The illusions he'd spun came crashing down, leaving him exposed. In that moment, a karmic shift took shape. His free ride was over. Margaret and Howard were left reeling by Greg's revelations. Years of blind faith in their son's grandiose plans crumbled around them, and they found themselves at a loss for words. Nadia watched the shock play across their faces, a mix of anger, shame, and lingering denial. "How could you deceive us like this?" Howard asked, turning to Greg. "We sacrificed so much." Greg tried to salvage the moment. "Dad, I was doing it for us, to bring in more money." "Stop lying," Nadia interjected. "You were doing it to live large, expecting Mom and Dad to bail you out." "That's the pattern, isn't it?" Margaret clenched her fists, glaring at Nadia. "Don't act so smug. You were ready to blackmail your own brother." Nadia's shoulders tensed. "I only gathered that information because you all cornered me. I had no choice. You forced my hand." A numbness seemed to settle over the household. Relatives whispered among themselves, some stepping away, others exchanging looks of disbelief. The parental favoritism that had festered for years lay exposed under the harsh light of truth. With Greg unmasked, Margaret and Howard had little choice but to confront the destructive dynamic they had cultivated. In the days following the dramatic Thanksgiving fallout, Nadia packed her suitcase. She refused to linger in a place where her autonomy and worth were so callously dismissed. Before leaving, she met with a handful of supportive relatives who applauded her courage to stand up for herself. Aunt Linda offered her guest room until she could return to her own apartment and settle back into work. Greg was left to grapple with his crumbling investments. Without Nadia's funds, he faced the consequences of his reckless financial choices. He raged at his parents for not finding another way to bail him out, but their resources were stretched thin, and sympathy had worn away. As Nadia loaded her luggage into the trunk of her car, Margaret and Howard stood on the porch, looking both remorseful and stubborn. She couldn't quite read their expressions, regret mixed with lingering resentment. She offered them no words of farewell, only a final glance that conveyed her enduring hurt and steely resolve. While her heart ached from betrayal, humiliation, and injustice, Nadia felt a surge of triumph. She had refused to be robbed of her accomplishments. Driving away from the house, she inhaled deeply, leaving behind a toxic dynamic that no longer held her hostage. For the first time in years, she was free, ready to embrace the life she truly deserved.